I never thought a taxi ride could quietly rewrite my future, but that night it did, and it did not announce itself with fear or chaos. It came calmly, like everything else dangerous does. It was raining hard in the city, the kind of rain that turns streetlights into blurry halos and makes people hurry without looking at each other. I had just left work, exhausted, distracted, thinking about nothing more serious than dinner and sleep, when I raised my hand. A yellow taxi slowed down and stopped in front of me. It looked old, scratched paint, fogged windows. The driver barely glanced at me before unlocking the door. I got in. The smell inside was a mix of stale coffee and damp fabric. The meter clicked on and the car moved forward. The radio stayed off. No small talk, no greeting, just rain in motion. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then the driver asked where I worked. His voice was low, steady, too controlled. I answered without thinking. He nodded like he already knew. Silence returned, but it felt heavier now, like something unsaid was sitting between us. I noticed his hands on the wheel. They were tight, gripping harder than necessary. His eyes kept shifting to the mirror, not to watch traffic, but to watch me. The car turned down a side street, one I did not usually take. I mentioned it casually. He said traffic was bad ahead. His tone did not invite questions. I let it go, but my chest felt tight. We drove longer than expected. The streets grew emptier, streetlights farther apart. Finally, he slowed down near my block. I reached for my wallet, relieved. He printed the receipt but hesitated before handing it to me. His fingers trembled slightly when he passed it over, and without turning his head he said, "Read this when you are inside. If you read it now, you will not make it home." I laughed softly, thinking it was a strange joke, but his eyes met mine in the mirror, and there was no humor there, only urgency, fear, and something like regret. I stepped out, confused. The taxi pulled away, immediately disappearing into the rain. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the empty street. The receipt felt warm in my hand, like it had weight beyond paper. I went inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, breathing hard. Then I turned the receipt over. The back was blank, except for one sentence written in uneven ink: "Tomorrow the police will come. Do not lie." My heart started pounding. I read it again, trying to find logic. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I was overreacting. I had never been in trouble, never dealt with police beyond traffic stops. I barely slept. Every sound felt amplified. Every car outside made me look through the window. Morning came too quickly. At exactly 8, there was a knock. 2 men stood outside, plain clothes, serious expressions. They said they were detectives and wanted to ask a few questions. Inside my head, the receipt screamed at me. I answered carefully, truthfully. They asked about my work, my commute, the taxi I took the night before. They knew details I had not shared. I did not lie. When they left, one of them paused and said, "You did the right thing." My phone buzzed moments later from an unknown number. "You listened, that saved you." The news broke that evening: a taxi driver arrested across town, linked to money laundering and multiple homicides. They called him a criminal, then corrected themselves. He had been an informant. My stomach dropped. His face from the mirror replayed in my mind, the fear, the warning, the receipt. I realized then he had not been protecting himself. He had been protecting a stranger, and whatever danger was circling me had not disappeared. It had only noticed that I was aware. That night I sat in the dark with every light off, listening to the city breathe outside my window, cars passing somewhere distant, sirens rising and falling like warnings meant for someone else. But I knew now they were not meant for someone else. They were meant for people who did not know they were already involved. I kept replaying the driver's face, the way his eyes searched mine, like he was memorizing me, as if he knew this would be the last chance to make sure I understood. I checked my phone again and again, hoping for another message, but nothing came, just silence. The next morning I called in sick, something I almost never did, and spent hours staring at the receipt like it might change if I looked long enough. I noticed something I had missed before: a number printed near the bottom, slightly smudged, different ink than the rest. It was not part of the fare. It was too long to be random. I copied it down without knowing why. Around noon my neighbor knocked, asking if I had heard about the taxi driver on the news. His voice was excited, the way people sound when danger brushes past them without stopping. I said no, and closed the door quickly. My hands were shaking again. I tried the number from the receipt. It rang once, then went to voicemail. No greeting, just a click and silence. I did not leave a message. An hour later my phone buzzed. "Unknown number, you should not have called." My throat went dry. I typed, "Who is this?" The response came immediately: "Someone who owes him." That was when I understood the driver was not acting alone. Informants rarely do. The warning had layers, and I had just peeled back another one. The rest of the day passed slowly. Every shadow felt longer, every sound felt closer. I packed a small bag without realizing it: clothes, documents, cash. I told myself it was precaution, but deep down I knew I was preparing to run. That evening another message arrived: "Stay where you are, they are watching." Movement. I froze. Whoever this was knew me well enough to know my instincts. I sat back down and waited. Hours passed, then close to midnight my phone rang. It was a blocked number. I answered against my better judgment. The voice was female, calm, measured, American accent, older than mine. "You were not meant to notice the number," she said. I asked who she was. She paused, then said, "Someone who lost more than you almost did." She explained the driver had been feeding information for years, moving between worlds. Criminals thought he was one of them. Law enforcement used him, and People like her cleaned up what was left behind. He had seen something tied to my name, not because I was guilty but because I was convenient. Someone had used my identity to move money, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Digital trails masked through ordinary transactions, rides, delivery services, things no one questions until they add up. The driver realized it too late. He could not erase the trail, but he could warn me. I asked, why me? Why save a stranger? She said, because you were still clean. And because he was tired of watching innocent people pay for other people's sins. She told me the police would keep asking questions, unofficially, quietly, pressure without charges until the real culprits were exposed or until I broke. She told me to do exactly what I was told and never speak about the receipt again. The call ended. I did not sleep that week. My life shrank. I went nowhere unnecessary, spoke to no one extra. The detectives returned twice asking the same questions, different ways. I stayed calm, stuck to the truth. Each time I felt like I was being weighed, measured, evaluated, not for guilt but for usefulness. On the fourth day, I noticed a car parked across the street, engine running, same time every evening, different plates, same model. I mentioned it in a message. The reply came, we know, do not react. That sentence scared me more than anything else because it meant someone else was always a step ahead, controlling pieces I could not see. The following night, the car was gone, replaced by something worse. A man approached me as I unlocked my building. He smiled too easily, said my name without introduction. He said I seemed stressed and suggested coffee. I declined. He leaned closer and whispered, we can make this easy or permanent. Then he walked away. My phone buzzed seconds later. Do not engage. That was the moment fear turned into anger. I did not ask for this. I did not choose to be useful or clean or noticed. I was just living my life. The woman called again later, explaining the man was testing boundaries, seeing if intimidation would work. She said it would escalate before it ended. I asked how it ended. She said with exposure or silence, permanent silence. I realized then that the receipt was not just a warning, it was a line I had crossed. The moment I read it, I was no longer invisible, and invisibility had been my greatest protection. I understood then that there would be no clean return to the life I had before, because once someone sees the machinery behind ordinary things, the taxis, the receipts, the quiet transactions, they never unsee it. The woman called one last time just before dawn, and her voice sounded different, softer, like someone saying goodbye. She told me the operation was reaching its final stage, that the people who had used my identity were starting to panic because the trail was closing, and she said I would be asked to do one thing only once, and if I agreed it would end everything. If I refused, it would drag on until someone made a mistake, and mistakes always cost lives. She told me to leave my apartment at exactly 7, take a taxi from the corner stand and go to the address. She texted, no detours, no delays. I did not ask questions. I showered, dressed, packed nothing, and left behind the receipt on the kitchen table for the first time, trusting that its purpose had already been served. The morning air was cold, sharp, like a warning. The taxi arrived on time, a different driver, younger, unaware. I watched the city pass by, realizing how invisible danger had always been hiding in plain sight. We stopped at a government building I had passed dozens of times without noticing. I was escorted inside into a room with no windows where the detectives were waiting, along with 2 people I had never seen but instantly recognized as the kind who never appear on news reports. They laid everything out, the false accounts, the layered transactions, the criminal network using ordinary citizens as shields without their knowledge. The receipt, the number, the driver, all of it had connected gaps they could not legally close without a witness like me. I signed statements, spoke the truth again and again until my voice felt empty. When it was done, one of them said quietly, you were never the target, you were the proof. Hours later, I walked out into sunlight feeling lighter and older at the same time. That evening, the news reported multiple arrests across the city, financial crimes exposed, years in the making, no mention of informants, no mention of receipts, no mention of me. My phone buzzed once, unknown number. He would be glad you made it. Then the number disappeared. Weeks passed, then months. The parked cars never returned. The question stopped. I moved apartments, changed routines, reclaimed silence. Life slowly stitched itself back together, but it was different now, steadier, more deliberate. I never took a taxi without noticing the driver's hands on the wheel, never held a receipt without turning it over, and sometimes late at night I thought about a man in a yellow taxi who chose to warn a stranger instead of saving himself, and I realized the truth that stayed with me was simple and heavy. Ordinary people survive because someone decides to be brave quietly, anonymously, and without reward, and sometimes the smallest piece of paper can carry the weight of a life saved and a story that will never be told out loud again.